Dark shadows, survival.
Centuries ago, before America became the country we know today, there was a name the slave traders tried to erase, a name they beat, buried, and silenced. But the name refused to die. It lived in the memory of a 17-year-old African warrior who was supposed to break. Instead, he became the beginning of a haunting legacy that still whispers across history. If you think you know the story of Toby, you do not. The truth is far darker. And it begins long before he ever set foot in Virginia. Part 1. The Taking of Kinte. 98 Africans arrived at Annapolis Harbor on September 29, 1767. They came on a ship called the Lord Ligonier. 42 people had already died before the ship even reached America. Among the survivors was a young Mandinka warrior, 17 years old, strong, trained, and proud. His real name was Kinte. The men who owned the records in Virginia did not want that name to survive. They wrote another name instead. They wrote Toby, but before he became Toby he had lived a life no record book ever described. And that life was filled with shadows. Long before the ship, long before the chains, the Gambia River cut through West Africa like a wound. British ships traveled deep into the continent. The fort on James Island took in thousands of captured Africans every year. By 1767 the demand for tobacco workers in Virginia had reached dangerous levels. British traders wanted young men. They wanted warriors. They wanted strength. And they were willing to pay for it. 2 miles from the British fort was the Mandinka village of Jufer. This place had survived generations of raids. The Kinte family lived there, respected as blacksmiths and spiritual leaders. They made sacred drums. They kept old traditions alive even when the world outside tried to destroy them. They taught their children to trust the forest but fear the river. They taught them to run at the first sign of the Slaties, men who captured their own people and sold them to Europeans. Amoro Kinte knew these dangers better than anyone. As a blacksmith he had shaped tools, weapons, and unfortunately shackles. He knew exactly what those iron bands could do. He had seen villages emptied in a single night. He taught his son the art of drum making, a tradition that kept Mandinka culture alive. But it was also a survival skill. Sometimes ship captains kept drummers alive to control the captives and keep order through rhythm. Drum makers sometimes had a better chance of survival. Kinte was the firstborn son. His name meant whole or complete. His people expected him to carry the family forward. By 17 he had finished warrior training. He could hunt with a spear. He could recite 7 generations of his family. Elders said he would one day be a leader. On an early morning in July 1767 he left his village to gather wood for drum making. The kind of wood he needed grew 3 miles away. Many young men walked there often. It was familiar land, sacred land, safe land. Kinte carried no weapon because Mandinka warriors respected the gathering grounds. He moved through the forest with calm confidence. What he did not know was that the British colonel stationed at James Island had arrived with urgent orders. They needed a full ship. They needed 140 captives. The ship sat waiting. The traders working with the British had been promised extra pay for young males. 4 Slaties had seen Kinte leave the village. They had been waiting for someone just like him. The attack was fast and silent. Kinte never even saw the first blow. A club struck his shoulder and sent him to the ground. Before his cry could escape, a hand clamped over his mouth. 2 more men pinned his arms. A cloth wrapped around his eyes. Another around his mouth. Ropes bit into his wrists. 90 seconds. That was all it took. 90 seconds for a free man to become cargo. The Slaties dragged him through the forest. The ground cut his knees. Branches tore at his skin. He was thrown into a holding pen near the river. 24 others were already there. Some from nearby villages. Some captured weeks before. All of them sat chained like animals. For 3 days Kinte stayed there. The sun burned them during the day. The cold tortured them at night. The guards beat anyone who spoke too loudly. Food was barely enough to survive. Water was limited. It was not just suffering. It was psychological control. These men wanted to break captives before they even reached the ship. When the British crew came, they brought a surgeon named Dr. Thompson. His job was not to heal. His job was to examine people as if they were livestock. He checked their teeth, their muscles, their eyes, their health. 7 captives were rejected. Kinte passed. 17 years old, strong, perfect for Virginia plantations. He was paid for in rum, cloth, and iron bars. The British wrote his existence in a book. Male, Mandinka, age 17, no name. Small boats carried the captives to the Lord Ligonier. It was the first time Kinte saw the ship. The wooden giant towered above the water, built to break spirits as much as to carry bodies. More captives watched from the small openings below deck. Their eyes were empty, or terrified, or both. The new captives were pushed below deck and into darkness. The ceiling was so low everyone had to crouch or lie down. The space for each person was the size of a grave. The air was heavy and hot. The smell of fear mixed with sweat and sickness. Chains connected everyone, right ankle to left ankle. No one could move alone. Kinte was chained to a man named Fanta. Fanta knew a little of Kinte's dialect. Enough to whisper warnings. Enough to whisper how to survive. The ship stayed near the coast for a week. Below deck the heat grew worse. Food came once a day in buckets shared by 10 people. Water came in tiny amounts. They were not meant to stay healthy. They were meant to stay alive. Barely. This was only the beginning. The ocean had not even started its work yet. And Kinte did not know it, but he would spend the next 55 years fighting to keep one thing alive. His name. The name they tried to erase. The name they feared. The name that refused to die. Engaging hook. The ocean was supposed to be a path to profit for the British. But for the captives trapped in the belly of the Lord Ligonier, the ocean became something else entirely. It became a living monster. It swallowed names, families, and hope. And in the darkest hours of that nightmare, when disease and storms tore through the ship without mercy, a 17-year-old Mandinka warrior learned the true meaning of survival. If you think the story was brutal before, it is about to enter a new level of horror. Part 2. The Fever in the Storm. The waste buckets on the Lord Ligonier overflowed long before the ship left the coast of Africa. The stench was unbearable. The crew did not care. They treated the captives the way farmers treat livestock. Every 3 days they sprayed cold water through the hold to wash the filth away. The water mixed with sweat, blood, and sickness. It cooled beneath the captives, soaking into their skin. Disease spread quickly. Dysentery appeared within days. Men cried out in pain as their bodies weakened. A fever followed soon after. It swept through the lower deck like fire, killing 4 men during the first week. The surgeon on board examined the sick, but he did nothing to help them. His job was not to save lives. His job was to decide whether the dying could still survive long enough to be sold for profit. Anyone too sick to recover was already considered lost money. On July 5, 1767, the Lord Ligonier pushed away from the African coast carrying 140 captives. Captain Davies wrote in his log that the cargo was excellent. He expected a profitable journey. He wrote nothing about the suffering that created that so-called profit. He wrote nothing about the screams in the darkness below his feet. The ocean crossing was called the Middle Passage. Some voyages lasted 6 weeks. Others lasted 12. The route for this ship led past the Cape Verde Islands, then into the open ocean, then finally toward the Caribbean before sailing north to the harbor in Annapolis. For the Africans trapped below deck, time lost meaning. There were no sunrises, no sunsets, only misery and confusion. British rules required the crew to bring the captives to the deck once a day for forced exercise. The captives were still chained together. They were pushed and pulled into short movements meant to keep them alive long enough to sell. For the first time, people from different villages and tribes were able to look at one another. They began to understand how large the group truly was. Dozens of languages, dozens of cultures, all suffering the same fate. Kunta tried to hold on to the lessons his father taught him about courage and honor. But nothing in his training had prepared him for this. He had no weapon. He had no idea where the ship was going. The darkness felt endless. And yet he watched everything. He studied the routine. He noticed that when the weather was rough the sailors became less strict. They moved more quickly and paid less attention to small movements. He noticed that the forced exercise happened around the same time each day. He noticed that the surgeon visited only when required. All these details were small. None offered immediate escape, but Kunta stored them in his mind. His father had said a warrior does not act without knowledge. Every detail might someday matter. Another captive named Cuddy became important during those early weeks. He had worked as a trader before his capture. He understood some English from speaking with British merchants. He listened carefully whenever crew members spoke near the hold. He learned that the ship was headed for a place the crew called Naples. Some Mandinka speakers recognized that word. It was how they pronounced Annapolis. There they would be sold at auction. Tobacco plantations would become their new prisons. Most would not survive 10 years. That was the brutal truth. Some captives began to whisper about rebellion. They believed that if enough people were brought to the deck at the same time they might overpower the crew. But the shackles made movement slow. The crew carried muskets and short swords. Any attack that failed would mean immediate death for everyone involved. It was an unbearable choice. Fight and die, or survive and become a slave. Kunta listened to every discussion but remained silent. His father had taught him that the smartest warrior knows when a battle cannot be won. The Lord Ligonier was a floating fortress. Every advantage belonged to the British. 3 weeks into the voyage a new fever swept through the hold. It moved faster than the first one. The heat, the lack of fresh air, the dirty water, and the waste created a perfect place for sickness to grow. Men who survived the first weeks now began to collapse. Some died still chained to the living. Their bodies stayed there until a crew member happened to notice. Sometimes that took hours. Sometimes it took days. The surgeon kept careful records of every death. To him the captives were numbers. A 15% death rate was acceptable. 30% needed explanation. 40% meant trouble for the captain. Death was not a tragedy. It was a business concern. Kunta's partner Fanta began to show fever symptoms in the 4th week. He shivered despite the suffocating heat. He whispered nonsense as his mind slipped away. One moment he recognized Kunta. The next moment he spoke to ghosts. Before he died he apologized to Kunta for the burden he would become. Fanta died 2 days later. His body remained chained to Kunta for 18 long hours. When the crew finally removed the corpse they did not give Kunta a new partner. They shortened his chain and locked it directly to the wall. This gave him even less freedom than before. He was alone and the loneliness felt like another kind of sickness. Weeks passed. The stress of isolation almost broke him. He could hear voices around him but he could not truly speak to anyone. He floated between waking and dreaming. Sometimes he wondered if he was already dead. Then the storm came. The weather changed as the ship approached the center of the Atlantic. The sky darkened. The air felt heavy. The wind shifted without warning. The crew rushed to secure the ship. The waves grew larger. The hold began to shake violently. Men fell against their chains. Above them the wooden beams groaned under pressure. Then the water arrived. Waves crashed over the deck and poured through the tiny openings above the captives. Cold water dumped onto their heads in the darkness. Panic spread faster than the fever. And the worst had not even begun. If you want, I will continue with part 3 in the same style. Part 3. The Middle Passage. Engaging hook. Imagine being trapped in the dark beneath a ship where the ocean becomes your enemy. Imagine storm waves slamming you upward, slamming you downward, while chains bite into your skin and every scream around you feels like it belongs to someone whose soul is already gone. That is where the horror truly begins. Part 3. The first hours of the storm turned the slave deck into a place that felt almost alive, breathing rot and fear. 6 inches of seawater sloshed back and forth across the wooden floor, mixing with overflowing waste buckets. The smell was unbearable. The water burned the skin. But the worst part was that no one could escape it. Shackles pinned every man in place. Kunta had felt storms before in Africa. He knew the sound of thunder, the rush of wind, the anger of the sky. But he had never known what it felt like to face a storm while trapped like cargo. Each time the Lord Ligonier climbed a wave, the entire ship seemed to hold its breath. Then it would fall sharply, so fast and so hard that the chained bodies lifted off the boards before crashing back down. Pain shot through everyone. People cried out. Some prayed. Some begged to die. Up above, the crew shouted orders. The timbers of the ship groaned under the strain. And in the darkness, Kunta heard things he would remember forever. Men screaming because they believed the ship was sinking. Men sobbing because they believed they would drown while chained to the floor. Men who had held on tightly to their courage in Africa now losing their minds as the storm took away all sense of time, place, and hope. The storm did not pass quickly. It stayed for 4 terrible days. No one brought food or water below deck. The British crew cared only about their own survival. The people chained below were not considered human. They were listed as cargo. Thirst clawed at Kunta's throat. Hunger twisted in his stomach. The violent motion made it feel as if the world were shaking apart. Some men screamed for hours without stopping. Some screamed until sound left their throats and their mouths stayed open in silent terror. When the storm finally ended, the hold fell into a horrible quiet. Dr. Thompson came down with a lantern and a cloth over his nose. His job was not to help anyone. His job was to count the damage. 18 more captives were gone. Some had been crushed by the motion. Some had drunk the filthy water out of desperation. Others seemed to have simply broken inside. Their minds had slipped away, and their bodies followed soon after. The dead were dragged away and thrown into the ocean. Then the crew sprayed cold seawater across the deck, not bothering to move the survivors first. Kunta felt the water hit his skin like knives. But the voyage was far from over. The storm deaths pushed the total to 42. To the Royal Africa Company, that number mattered only on a paper ledger. The captain would be judged on how many were left alive. 98 captives meant the company still expected to profit. Misery had a financial value. For the survivors, the storm had changed everything. Disease spread faster now. The contaminated water never fully washed away. The air stayed heavy with sickness. Wounds festered. Skin tore. The surgeon watched but never healed. By the 9th week, something began to happen inside Kunta. The suffering, the silence, the darkness, and the endless fear pushed deep into his mind. He watched men forget who they were. Men who had boarded with strong memories of home now struggled to recall even their father's name. Languages blended. Traditions slipped away. The British had not needed to steal identities. The conditions did it for them. But one thing remained intact within Kunta. His name. In Mandinka culture, names were living things. They held power. They linked a person to their ancestors. They reminded you of who you were and why you were born. Kunta meant whole. It meant complete. His father had chosen it with purpose. So Kunta created a ritual, a small act of resistance no one could touch. Every morning, during the brief moments when they were taken on deck for exercise, he recited his lineage silently. I am Kunta Kinte, son of Amoro Kinte, grandson of Kairaba Kunta Kinte of Jufer. He remembered the lessons his father had taught him. He imagined the sound of drums from his village. He pictured the fields, the smells, the way food tasted over a fire. These memories were more than comfort. They were survival. On the 11th week, land appeared. The crew changed instantly. They cleaned the ship. They repaired ropes and boards. They fed the captives slightly better food. None of it was kindness. It was business. Buyers in Annapolis would inspect every man closely. The healthier the slave looked, the higher the price. On September 29, 1767, the Lord Ligonier entered Annapolis harbor. The sight of land filled Kunta with a strange mix of relief and dread. The ocean journey was ending, but a new life of forced labor was waiting. He did not know the language. He did not know the customs. He did not know what kind of work he would be forced into or how long he would survive. Officials boarded first to count the cargo. Then small groups of captives were brought onto the deck for inspection. The cold air felt strange on their skin. The white faces staring at them felt even stranger. A newspaper printed an advertisement a few days later. Just imported. A cargo of choice healthy slaves. The ad did not mention the 42 who had died. It did not mention the terror, the sickness, or the storms. It simply announced that 98 human beings were ready to be sold. The auction took place at a tavern near the docks. Buyers inspected the captives. They checked teeth. They felt muscles. They asked the surgeon where people came from. African cultures were complex, but the buyers treated them as if they were all the same. Among the crowd was John Waller of Virginia. He needed young men to work his family's tobacco plantation. When he saw Kunta, he saw strength. He saw a young man who could survive long hours in a field. He saw someone valuable. He did not see the fire in Kunta's eyes for what it truly was. Resistance. John bid quickly. He won. Kunta went from property of the British Crown to property of a single man. The 3-day journey to Virginia was cold, painful, and silent. Shackles stayed on. Food was scarce. John tried to teach basic English words through gestures and force. The sounds made no sense to Kunta. Nothing sounded like home. When they reached the plantation, dozens of enslaved people watched him arrive. They had seen many new arrivals before. They knew the look of someone who had survived the Middle Passage. They also knew the hardest part was still ahead. And Kunta would soon learn the truth. The ocean had not broken him. But the land had its own horrors waiting. If you'd like part 4, just tell me. Engaging hook. Sometimes the scariest secrets are the ones that hide in plain sight. And in Whitmore Seminary, the shadows did not just watch. They whispered. They waited. And on the 4th night, they finally reached out. Part 4. Catherine woke before dawn, her breathing fast and uneven. The dream still clung to her body like cold sweat. She had seen the corridor again, the same long hallway with the wooden floor that always seemed wet even though she never saw water there. In the dream, she heard someone call her name from the other end. A soft voice. A familiar voice. But when she tried to run, the floor stretched longer and longer until she felt trapped inside a tunnel that had no end. She sat up, rubbing her face. The dormitory was silent. The other girls still slept, wrapped in thin blankets. A faint winter breeze slipped through the cracked window, making the candles flicker even though they should have burned out hours ago. She quietly placed her feet on the floor. Something was different this morning. She felt watched again, but not by the same presence as before. This time it felt closer. When she stepped into the hallway, the air smelled of damp stone, as if the walls had been sweating all night. The floorboards creaked under her weight. She listened for footsteps but heard only the low hum of the old building breathing around her. Sister Agatha always said the building had a soul. Catherine believed that now. She just hoped the soul was not hungry. She headed toward the chapel. Every morning the girls were expected to attend silent prayer, but Catherine had started going early. She needed the stillness, the quiet place where she could gather her thoughts before the day swallowed her again. When she pushed open the chapel door, she froze. Sister Helena was already inside. The older nun stood in front of the altar, whispering something Catherine could not understand. Her hands rose slowly, as if holding an invisible object. The candle flames bent toward her instead of away, pulled by something Catherine could not see. Catherine did not mean to make a sound, but her breath caught in a tiny gasp. Sister Helena turned her head sharply. Her eyes found Catherine where she stood in the doorway. "You should not be awake at this hour, child." Her voice was calm, but her stare felt heavy, like a hand pressing on Catherine's chest. "I could not sleep," Catherine whispered. Sister Helena nodded slowly. Then she smiled, but her smile did not reach her eyes. "Come closer. There is something you must learn." Catherine felt a cold pulse run through her arms. She wanted to walk away. She wanted to run, but something in Sister Helena's tone made her step forward instead. When she reached the front pew, Sister Helena lowered her hands. "Do you know why Whitmore Seminary stands alone in these woods?" she asked. Catherine shook her head. "Because solitude makes the soul louder," Sister Helena said. "When the world is silent, you hear truths that others ignore." Catherine swallowed. "What kind of truths?" "The ones that change you from the inside." Sister Helena stepped closer. Catherine tried not to tremble, but she could not stop the shaking in her fingers. The nun lifted Catherine's chin with two cold fingers. "You have been dreaming again," she said. "I can see it in your eyes." Catherine's stomach tightened. How did she know? Sister Helena leaned closer. "Dreams are doors, child. Some doors you must open. Some you must not. But yours is calling you for a reason." A drop of candle wax slid down the altar candle behind them. It hit the wood with a soft tap, breaking the silence. Sister Helena lowered her hand. "Pray with me," she said. Catherine hesitated, but the nun's tone left little room to refuse. They knelt together on the cold stone floor. "Close your eyes," Sister Helena whispered. Catherine obeyed. The chapel darkened behind her eyelids. Her breathing slowed. She tried to focus on the quiet hum of the candles. Then she heard it. A whisper. Soft, faint, but real. "Catherine." She jerked her eyes open. The candles flickered wildly. The air turned colder. Sister Helena did not look surprised. She kept her eyes closed, her lips moving silently. Catherine stumbled back. The whisper came again, floating through the chapel like a slow breath. "Catherine." It was the same voice from her dream. A girl's voice. Young, hurt. She pressed her hands to her ears, but the whisper slipped through anyway. She could feel it inside her head, curling around her thoughts. "Who are you?" Catherine whispered. The whisper stopped. Then she heard something behind her. A soft footstep. She spun around. The chapel was empty. Sister Helena rose slowly. Her face looked pale in the candlelight. "You heard her, didn't you?" Catherine nodded, shaking. Sister Helena's expression darkened. "You must be careful. The girl who calls your name, she is not what she seems." "Who is she?" "A lost one," Sister Helena said quietly. "She came here many years ago. But she never left." Catherine felt her heart race faster. "What do you mean?" Sister Helena turned away. "Some souls remain where they suffer the most." Catherine felt the air in her chest freeze. She wanted answers, but before she could speak, the chapel door creaked open. Sister Agnes entered with 2 other nuns, all carrying prayer books. Morning bells rang faintly from the courtyard. Sister Helena's face shifted back into her calm mask. "Go join the others," she whispered. Catherine hurried out of the chapel. But as she walked down the hallway, she felt something beside her. A presence. A faint cold shadow that moved when she moved. That afternoon, during chores, she noticed another strange thing. The younger girls were whispering nervously around the well behind the seminary. Catherine approached them. "What happened?" she asked. One girl pointed at the well. "We heard someone crying inside." Catherine felt her stomach twist. A second girl added, "It sounded like a girl." She kept saying a name. Catherine's throat tightened. "What name?" They looked at each other. "Yours," the youngest one said. Catherine stepped back. The sun shone bright overhead, but she felt colder than she did inside the chapel. The same whisper still echoed in her ears. That night, she lay awake long after the others slept. The dormitory was dark. The wind outside rattled the shutters softly. Then she heard it again. Not a dream, not her imagination. "Catherine." The voice drifted from the hallway. This time, she knew she could not ignore it. She slowly climbed out of bed, her feet shaking as they touched the cold wooden floor. She opened the dormitory door. The hallway stretched before her. Long, silent, shadows shifting along the walls even though nothing moved. The whisper came again, closer now. "Come to me." Catherine stepped forward. Whatever waited for her in the dark, she knew it was finally ready to show itself. She just hoped she was ready too. "If you want part 5, just tell me." Engaging hook. Some people fear the dark, but Catherine had learned the truth. It was not the darkness itself that was dangerous. It was what waited inside it. And on the 5th night, it finally stepped forward. Part 5. Catherine stood barefoot in the dim hallway, listening to the whisper fade into the shadows. The floor felt colder than usual, as if the boards had soaked up the fear that lived inside this place. The long corridor stretched ahead of her, lit only by the moonlight leaking in through the cracked windows. She took a slow breath. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to move forward. Every step echoed softly, almost too loud in the quiet building. The whisper came again. It drifted along the hallway like a thin layer of fog. "Catherine." Her heart pounded harder. The voice sounded young, maybe around her age. But there was something broken inside it, something that made her chest tighten with dread and sympathy at the same time. She reached the corner where the hallway bent sharply to the right. A faint cold breeze brushed her cheek as if someone had walked past her. She swallowed hard. "Show yourself," she whispered. The only answer was silence. Catherine continued down the hallway until she reached the old storage room. The door was open slightly, just enough for a shadow to slip through. The whisper seemed stronger here. She pushed the door slowly. It creaked as if complaining. The room inside was dark, filled with old furniture stacked against the wall. Dust floated in the air, catching the moonlight like tiny silver flakes. Catherine stepped inside. The air grew colder immediately. Her breath turned pale in front of her. She closed the door behind her and stood very still. "If you are here, speak to me." The room remained quiet. She took another step. Her foot touched something soft. She froze. Slowly she looked down. It was a ribbon, a small white ribbon lying on the floor. It looked fresh, as if it had been dropped that very moment. Catherine bent down and picked it up. A scent of lavender rose from the cloth. The voice whispered again, "You found it." Catherine turned around fast. Her pulse raced. "Who are you?" she asked. There was no reply this time. Only a faint sobbing sound that filled the room. She followed the sound to the back wall where a large wardrobe stood. The sobbing grew louder as she approached. Her hands shook uncontrollably now. She reached for the wardrobe door. Before she could open it, someone grabbed her shoulder. She gasped and spun around. It was Sister Agnes. Her eyes were wide with anger and fear. "What are you doing here at this hour?" Catherine could barely speak. "I heard someone crying." Sister Agnes tightened her grip. "There is no one here. You must return to bed immediately." But Catherine pointed at the wardrobe. "Someone is inside. I heard her." Sister Agnes looked at the wardrobe with an expression that made Catherine step back. It was not fear exactly. It was more like painful recognition. She pulled Catherine toward the door. "This room is forbidden at night. You should not be wandering these halls. You will speak of this to no one. Do you understand?" Catherine nodded weakly, though she did not believe Sister Agnes for a moment. When they stepped back into the hallway, the door slammed behind them without being touched. The sound echoed through the entire building. Sister Agnes tightened her jaw and whispered a prayer under her breath. Catherine knew it was not the wind. She knew the crying girl was real. And she knew Sister Agnes was hiding something. The next morning, the atmosphere in the seminary felt heavier. The girls moved quietly, their eyes darting to the shadows as if they expected something to leap out. Catherine noticed that several nuns walked in pairs today. Their faces were tense. Their hands clutched rosaries much harder than usual. During chores, Catherine swept the hallway near the library when she noticed Sister Helena speaking with Sister Agnes in the corner. Their voices were low, but Catherine caught a few words. "She is hearing her. It is starting again. We cannot lose another one." Catherine's grip tightened on the broom. Her heart raced. She stepped closer, pretending to sweep. Sister Helena saw her first. Her eyes narrowed. Catherine froze. The two nuns ended their conversation immediately and walked away without another word. Catherine felt a cold shiver run through her body. They knew something she did not. Something dangerous. That afternoon, Catherine went to the courtyard to clear her thoughts. The winter air was sharp and refreshing. She sat near the old stone fountain. The water inside it had frozen into a still, glassy layer. She touched the surface lightly. It felt colder than winter should make it. Almost like the cold came from beneath, not above. A reflection appeared in the ice. A girl. Catherine yanked her hand back and looked around. No one was there. She leaned forward slowly and looked into the ice again. The reflection was gone. She felt the whisper curl around her ear. "Help me." Catherine jumped to her feet and stepped back. Her breath came fast. The whisper sounded so close she could almost feel the girl's breath on her neck. She looked toward the chapel. The door stood open. A faint glow spilled out, even though no ceremony was taking place. Catherine felt drawn to it. She approached slowly. Inside, the chapel was empty. The candles were unlit. The altar cloth hung still. The air felt thick, as if holding a storm inside it. Then she saw something carved into the front pew. Fresh scratches, not worn with age. A name, Elise. Catherine touched the carving gently. The wood felt warm beneath her fingers as if someone's hand had just left it. "Elise, are you Elise?" The whisper answered clearly. "Yes." Catherine sat down slowly. Her heart thudded like a drum. "Why are you calling me?" "Because you can hear me." "What do you want from me?" The air behind her stirred lightly. She felt fingers brush her hair. Cold fingers. "Find me." Catherine turned quickly. No one was there. Find you where? The whisper faded again. Only one word remained. Below. Below what? Silence swallowed the chapel. Catherine stood up, breathing fast. Below. What did Elise mean? She walked out into the hallway again. The building felt heavier now, as if the walls were listening. That night, Catherine could not sleep. Elise's whisper repeated in her mind like a chant. Below. 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 She sat up and looked around the dormitory. Everyone was asleep. She walked quietly to the hallway and looked toward the staircase that led to the basement. A place the nuns always kept locked. A place she had never seen. A place Elise might be calling from. Catherine stepped forward, her heart trembling. If the truth waited below, she was finally ready to face it. Even if it swallowed her whole. If you want part 6, just tell me. Engaging hook. Sometimes the truth is not hidden in darkness. Sometimes it is buried. And on this night, Catherine finally learned that the most terrifying secrets of the seminary were waiting beneath her feet. Part 6. The hallway stretched before Catherine like a long, gray throat. The only sound was her own breathing and the soft creak of the old floorboards. The rest of the dormitory slept behind her, unaware that she had slipped out of her bed and stepped into shadows she was never meant to explore. Elise's voice still echoed in her mind. Below. 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 Catherine started walking toward the staircase that led to the forbidden basement. The nuns always kept it locked, and she had never seen anyone go down there except Sister Agnes once late at night. Catherine remembered how pale Agnes looked when she came back up. She had pressed her fingers to her lips as if trying to hold in a scream. Now Catherine stood before the basement door. The lock looked old. A large iron keyhole sat in the center like a watchful eye. Catherine reached for the handle, though she knew it would not open. To her surprise, it did. The cold air that rushed out made her take a step back. It smelled damp, it smelled old, and it smelled like something that had not been disturbed in a long time. She whispered into the darkness. Elise, are you here? There was no reply, but the air felt expectant, as if someone was listening. Catherine stepped inside and began to move down the narrow staircase. The further she went, the colder it became. Her fingers brushed the rough stone walls, and she felt moisture clinging to them like sweat. A faint sound drifted up to her. Drip, drip, drip. Water, or something that sounded like water. The staircase opened into a large room with a low ceiling. Catherine paused at the bottom step. The moonlight slipped in through a small barred window high on the wall, revealing a row of old wooden crates, a few broken chairs, and shelves filled with jars covered in dust. But what caught her attention was the door on the far side of the room. A small iron door, barely tall enough for a person, barely wide enough to squeeze through. Catherine felt something cold brush her shoulder. She turned quickly, but no one was behind her. The whisper came again, faint but clear. Here. Catherine stepped toward the iron door. When she touched it, the metal felt warm under her hand. Almost like someone inside had been leaning against it. She pushed gently. The door opened with a long, slow groan. Behind it was a narrow passageway. The walls were stone, rough and uneven. The moonlight did not reach here. Catherine could barely see her own hands in front of her. She walked slowly, letting her fingers trace the walls to guide her. The whisper floated through the darkness. Catherine. She swallowed hard. Her voice trembled. Elise, I am here. Please show me where you are. A soft sobbing answered her. She followed the sound deeper into the passageway. The air grew colder. Her breath fogged in front of her. Something wet dripped from the ceiling onto her shoulder. When she touched it, it felt icy. Ahead, she saw a faint glow. A single candle burned on the floor at the end of the passage. The flame flickered, though there was no breeze. Catherine knelt beside it. The candle was new. Someone had lit it not long ago. Next to it lay a small wooden cross. Her fingers touched it gently. Elise, is this yours? A cold hand closed around her wrist. Catherine screamed and jerked back. But the hand did not hurt her. It held her gently, like a plea. A soft voice whispered close to her ear. You found me. Catherine trembled. Her voice shook. Where are you? The candle flame suddenly burned brighter, casting light against the wall ahead. Catherine gasped. There were carvings in the stone. Dozens of them. Names carved by shaking hands. Dates. Marks that looked like scratch lines from fingernails. At the very bottom was one name repeated many times. Elise. 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 Catherine's eyes filled with tears. What happened to you? She expected the whisper to answer softly as before. Instead, the passageway filled with a low moan of pain. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. Catherine backed away, her breath coming fast. Elise, I want to help you. Please tell me what to do. The air behind her shifted. She turned, and for the first time, she saw her. A girl stood at the edge of the candlelight. Her hair fell over her shoulders in tangled strands. Her dress was thin and torn. Her skin was pale, almost glowing. And her eyes were the saddest Catherine had ever seen. Elise did not speak. She only pointed to the far end of the passageway. Catherine turned slowly. There at the end of the hallway stood another door. Tall, heavy, made of dark wood that looked burned at the edges. The whisper returned. Do not go alone. Catherine felt a surge of fear. But she also felt something stronger. Elise had trusted her. She could not leave now. She walked toward the tall door. Her steps echoed like soft heartbeats against the stone. When she touched the handle, a cold shock shot up her arm. But she did not pull back. She pushed. The door opened into a small underground chamber. The floor was covered with symbols drawn in chalk. Some were circles, some were strange shapes, and some were symbols Catherine recognized from the nuns' private prayer books. In the center of the room lay a small wooden table. On it sat a silver bowl filled with dried flowers and pieces of cloth. Catherine's stomach twisted. She recognized the cloth. It was the same ribbon she had found days ago. Elise's ribbon. A soft whisper came from behind her. They tried to save me. Catherine turned. Elise stood in the doorway now, her eyes shimmering with tears. What do you mean? Elise looked down. Her voice trembled. I was sick. They brought me here. They prayed. They tried everything. But I died. And they left me here, alone. Catherine felt her heart crack with grief. Elise, I am so sorry. Elise stepped closer. Free me. Catherine looked around the chamber. Something was wrong. The air felt heavy and tight, like a memory trapped too long. She approached the table and lifted the bowl. Underneath it, she found a small locket. Inside was Elise's picture. Catherine held the locket to her chest. What do I do? Elise's voice answered softly. Take it above. Catherine nodded. As she stepped out of the chamber, she felt Elise walking beside her. Not touching her, but near enough to feel her presence. Catherine knew one thing now. The truth was much darker than she imagined. And the nuns had been hiding it for years. She climbed the stairs slowly, holding the locket tightly in her hand. The seminary was no longer just haunted. It was guilty, and Catherine was finally beginning to see why. If you want part 7, just tell me and I will continue. Engaging hook. Some doors stay closed because no one wants to open them. Others stay closed because something dangerous is waiting on the other side. Catherine was about to learn which kind she had unlocked. Part 7. Catherine did not sleep that night. She lay awake listening to the quiet breathing of the other girls in the dormitory, the moonlight sliding across the wooden floor like a thin blade. In her hand she still held Elise's locket. She kept her fingers wrapped around it, afraid that if she let go even for a moment, the small piece of Elise would disappear forever. Every creak of the old building made her jump. The walls seemed to breathe. The rafters groaned as if remembering something painful. Catherine kept seeing Elise's pale face in the darkness. Whenever she closed her eyes. When the morning bell rang, she rose with the others. She dressed carefully, hiding the locket under her sleeve. She moved through the usual morning routine, but she felt as if she were walking through thick water. The nuns noticed her silence. Sister Margaret stared at her a moment too long as if reading something in Catherine's eyes. At breakfast Catherine barely swallowed a few bites of porridge. The spoon trembled in her hand. She looked around the dining room. Every nun looked normal, calm, focused. But now Catherine knew the truth. Some of them had been part of whatever had happened to Elise. Some of them still were. Catherine's heart pounded as she thought about the basement, the carvings in the stone walls, the locked chamber, and Elise's whisper. The memory clung to her like fog. When breakfast ended, Catherine walked outside for chores with the other girls. The cool air brushed her face, but she did not feel relieved. She looked toward the forest that surrounded the seminary. The tall trees seemed to stand like silent watchers. She wondered if Elise had ever walked there. She wondered if her ghost had followed Catherine out into the sunlight. As the girls carried laundry to the drying line, Catherine waited until no one was looking. Then she slipped the locket from her sleeve and opened it again. Elise's face stared up at her, frozen in innocence. Catherine whispered softly, "I will help you, I promise." A soft cold wind brushed her cheek. Not like the natural wind. This one felt purposeful, almost like a touch. Catherine closed the locket quickly. She felt Elise nearby. The rest of the day moved slowly. Catherine tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to the basement. When she glanced at the nuns, she wondered who among them knew the truth. Who had watched Elise die? Who had hidden her away beneath the floor? By late afternoon, Catherine had made up her mind. She needed answers. She could not carry the weight of this alone. She would speak to someone. The question was who. Her thoughts drifted to Sister Agnes. Agnes had always seemed nervous. Always watching. Always slightly afraid of something no one else saw. Catherine remembered the night she saw Agnes coming up the basement stairs. Her face had been pale and strained. Something heavy had been sitting on her conscience. As evening prayers ended, Catherine followed Agnes quietly. She moved down the hallway with soft steps, careful not to be seen. Agnes entered her small room at the end of the west wing and gently shut the door. Catherine took a deep breath and knocked. There was silence. Then footsteps. Then the door opened just enough for Agnes to peer through. "Catherine, it is late. What do you need?" Her voice carried a tremble. Catherine swallowed hard. "I need to speak with you. May I come inside?" Agnes hesitated. Her eyes darted down the hallway as if afraid someone might see. Then she opened the door. The room was simple. A narrow bed, a small desk, a single candle flickering in a cup. Agnes shut the door behind Catherine and folded her hands nervously. "What is troubling you, child?" Catherine held the locket tightly. Her voice came out quiet. "I know about the basement." Agnes froze. The color drained from her face. Catherine continued. "I found the chamber. I saw the carvings. I found Elise." Agnes covered her mouth as if trying to stop a gasp. Her knees trembled, and she sank down onto the edge of the bed. How much did you see?" Catherine stepped closer. "I saw enough. I know she died there. I know the nuns tried something to save her. I know you were part of it." Agnes closed her eyes. Tears gathered in the corners. "This place holds many sorrows, Catherine. More than you can imagine." Catherine sat beside her. "Tell me, please." Agnes shook her head slowly as if fighting against her own memory. "Elise was brought here 3 winters ago. She fell terribly ill. Fever. Shivering. Then seeing things that were not there. The physician came twice but could not explain her ailment. The Mother Superior believed it was spiritual. She believed Elise was under attack." Catherine felt a chill crawl up her spine. "What did you do?" Agnes looked at her with haunted eyes. "We performed a prayer rite. A very old one. Something taught only to the most trusted sisters. We meant to save her. But the ritual was too strong. It took her instead." Catherine's heart pounded. "You killed her?" Agnes shook her head fiercely. "No, not intentionally. But our actions kept her spirit from passing on. She remained in that place. Waiting. Lost." Catherine clutched the locket. "Why did you not bury her properly? Why leave her there?" Agnes looked away. The Mother Superior believed the ritual had failed because Elise was touched by darkness. She believed Elise must remain where she died so her spirit could not wander. Catherine felt anger boiling inside her. She was a child. She was afraid. She was alone. Agnes whispered, "I know. And I have carried that guilt every day." Catherine leaned closer. "Elise is still there. She spoke to me. She asked me to take her locket above. She wants to be free." Agnes trembled. "Then she still suffers." Catherine nodded. "I need to help her. But I do not know how." Agnes looked toward the candle flame. "Her locket carries her memory. If you bring it to the chapel and light a prayer candle for her, it may release her spirit. But the Mother Superior will not allow this." She fears what freeing Elise might reveal. Catherine frowned. Reveal what? Agnes stared at her. The truth of what the ritual really was. And the truth about what lives beneath this building. Catherine felt the room grow colder. What is beneath it? Agnes whispered one word. A presence. Catherine's breath caught. A presence. Agnes nodded slowly. Something ancient. Something the first sisters believed they could contain. Something that feeds on fear and sorrow. Elise felt it before she died. And it has been growing stronger ever since. Catherine felt a tremor through her whole body. If we free her, will it come for us? Agnes closed her eyes. It already has. A sudden knock pounded on the door, making both of them jump. Sister Agnes, open this door immediately. The Mother Superior. Agnes froze in terror. Catherine grabbed the locket and stepped back from the bed. The candle flickered violently as the knocking grew louder. Open this door now. Catherine sensed Elise's presence behind her. And she knew the real horror was only beginning. If you want part 8, just tell me and I will continue. Part 8. Engaging hook. Sometimes the scariest thing is not the monster you see. It is the moment you finally understand what it wants from you. Part 8. The bells of Whitmore. The storm reached Whitmore Seminary like a living beast. Rain slapped the walls. Wind tore at the windows. The sky cracked open with white lightning. The old building trembled with every strike. But the storm outside was not the one haunting the halls that night. The real storm walked on two legs and whispered in the dark. Clara stood in the hallway, holding a candle that flickered with every breath she took. The power had gone out an hour earlier, leaving the entire seminary in darkness. She was alone, or so she hoped. She had spent the last night reading Sister Agnes's secret journal. It revealed the truth she feared. The disappearances in the seminary did not begin recently. They went back almost 70 years. Students vanished. Teachers vanished. Even a headmaster once disappeared. Every time the same strange sign was left behind, the school bell rang 3 times at midnight. Tonight was the first time Clara had heard the bell ring since arriving at Whitmore. She felt it in her bones. 3 slow rings. Deep. Heavy. Echoing like a warning from something older than the school itself. Her candle twisted in the wind, sneaking under the doors. She tried to steady her breath, but her hands were shaking hard. She whispered to herself, "You must stay calm. You have to." But staying calm felt impossible. Because she knew the bell never rang unless the darkness was awake. Clara walked down the hallway. Her shoes made small sounds on the wooden floor. The floorboards creaked like they were answering her steps. She kept looking over her shoulder. Every shadow seemed to move when she was not staring at it. Every corner felt alive. She reached the end of the hallway, where the stairs led up to the attic. Before tonight she had never been inside the attic. Sister Agnes wrote about it in the journal. She said the attic was the heart of the problem. She said something lived there. Something that fed on fear and silence. Clara wished she had never opened that journal. Her candle guttered again. She raised her hand to shield it. Her fingers shook. The flame stretched and then settled. She took a small breath. The attic door stood ahead of her. Tall, dark, closed. She could hear the wind pushing against it from the other side. But then something else joined the wind. A scraping. Slow, long, like nails dragged across wood. Clara froze. She tried to convince herself it was just branches. Just the storm. Just her imagination. But part of her knew. She was not imagining anything. The thing from the journal, the thing Sister Agnes warned about, was awake tonight. Clara stepped closer. Her hand touched the doorknob. It was cold, too cold, like someone had been holding it from the other side. She pulled back her hand and held her breath. The scraping stopped. Silence spread across the hallway. Heavy, thick, like the seminary itself was waiting. Then she heard footsteps coming from above. Slow, heavy, soft at first, but growing clearer. Someone or something was walking across the attic floor. Clara tried to step back, but her foot caught on a floorboard. She stumbled and the candle nearly slipped from her hand. She squeezed the base tightly and took another breath. She whispered again, "Run, you should run." Her body refused to move. A loud thud hit the attic floor, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. Clara gasped and stepped back. Her heart slammed in her chest. The footsteps started again, moving closer to the attic entrance. Clara backed away quickly. She reached the stairs and rushed down them. The candle flame jumped. She kept going. When she reached the first floor, she heard a sound that made her stop cold. The bell rang again. One long ring. Clara pressed her hand over her mouth. She could feel tears gathering in her eyes. The journal said the bell rang 3 times to announce a soul being claimed by the darkness. But this was different. The bell was ringing again. Slowly, as if calling her by name. Clara walked toward the main hallway. The bell hung in the center of the school tower. Its ringing filled the whole building. Every wall vibrated. Every window shook. Clara tightened her grip on the candle and kept going. She turned the corner and spotted something on the floor. A book. Large. Old. Leather-bound. The same journal she had left inside her room upstairs. But now it sat in the hallway. Open. Its pages fluttering even though there was no wind. Clara crouched down and looked at it. On the open page was a drawing. A tall figure wearing a long robe, not quite human but not fully monstrous. The face was covered. The hands were long, thin, almost skeletal. Under the drawing were 4 words written in hard strokes. It walks in storms. Clara closed the book with shaking hands. She felt the air shift behind her. The hallway suddenly grew colder. Her breath came out in a soft white cloud. She did not turn around. She could not. Something was behind her. She could feel the weight of its presence. The air thickened. Her ears rang. Her candle flame bent toward the wall as if pushed by a breath from something standing inches behind her. Slowly she turned her head. No one was there. The hallway was empty. Clara swallowed and stood up. She held the journal against her chest and tried to walk quickly, but her legs felt weak. Every instinct she had screamed at her to leave the seminary before the bell rang again. She reached the front door and pulled hard. It did not open. She tried again. The door would not move. It felt stuck, as if something heavy pressed against it from the outside. The building groaned. Lights flickered in the hallway even though the power was still out. The boards overhead creaked again. Clara looked up. She finally understood the truth Sister Agnes had tried to warn everyone about. The thing in the attic was not trapped. It was hunting, and tonight it had chosen her. Clara backed away from the door and looked down the hallway. Her candle was dimming. The shadows were growing, and somewhere above her the footsteps started again. Slow, steady, closer. Then the bell rang a final time. If you want, I can create part 9 next. Part 9. Engaging hook. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And some secrets will not stay buried, no matter how hard you try. Part 9. Shadows in the attic. Clara's breath came in short gasps as she pressed herself against the wall. The storm outside had faded, but inside Whitmore Seminary, the real terror had just begun. The bell had stopped ringing, but its echoes lingered in her mind like the warning of something far worse than thunder. The footsteps above her grew louder again. Not walking, but dragging. Something heavy, something patient. It circled the attic slowly, methodically. Clara knew it was tracking her, waiting for the moment she tried to escape. She looked at the journal clutched to her chest. Sister Agnes had written about a ritual, something to protect oneself against the darkness in the seminary. It required courage, faith, and knowledge. Clara had read the instructions, memorized the steps, but she had never imagined she would need to use them so soon. The attic staircase loomed in her mind, a path to either salvation or destruction. Clara knew she had to climb. She could not stay in the hall. The thing would find her, and then there would be no hope at all. She made her way toward the stairwell, keeping her body low. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a scream. Every shadow flickered as if it were alive. Her candle trembled in her hand. She focused on the small flame, the one thing she could control. Clara reached the base of the stairs and placed her hand on the first step. Cold, ice cold, though the storm had passed. She hesitated, but she reminded herself that fear was the thing that fed it. Fear gave it strength. She had to move. Step by step, she climbed. Each stair groaned beneath her weight. Every sound seemed magnified in the dark. The closer she got to the attic, the heavier the air became. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself onward. At the top, the attic door stood as a dark silhouette against the dim moonlight seeping through a small window. She took a deep breath and pushed it open. The room was empty. For a moment, relief washed over her. But it did not last. Shadows stretched across the rafters. A cold wind spiraled from the far corner. Something moved in the dark. Clara raised her candle, her hands shaking. The flame illuminated the shape of a tall figure, draped in tattered robes. Its face was hidden, but she felt its gaze. A hunger in its silence, an intelligence she could not escape. Clara remembered the ritual. She whispered the words she had memorized, small and steady at first, then louder. A rhythm of protection, a chant meant to guard the soul against creatures that walked between worlds. She repeated the names of those who had walked the seminary before her, the students, the nuns, the teachers. She recited their courage, their resistance. The figure shifted. Clara could feel it measuring her, testing her resolve. She continued the ritual, the words pouring from her like a river of fire against the cold. The shadows pulsed and writhed. Then, for the first time, the figure spoke. A voice like rusted chains. Low, hissing. You cannot hide from me. You are mine. Clara's stomach turned, but she stood her ground. She shouted the final lines of the ritual, the names of the ancestors, the protection prayers. The candle flame surged bright and hot, illuminating the figure in stark detail. It shrieked, a sound that pierced her ears, a scream not of anger but of rage and frustration. And then it vanished. The attic fell silent. Clara dropped to her knees, panting. The candle flickered softly. Dust drifted in the beams of moonlight. Her body shook, but she felt a small spark of hope. She had survived. She had faced the darkness and not been claimed. But the journal in her hands reminded her that the seminary was far from safe. The darkness was not gone. It had retreated, for now, but it learned, it would return. Clara explored the attic cautiously. She discovered old trunks, piles of forgotten books, and the remnants of centuries-old lessons. Some journals and letters were stacked neatly in the corner. She flipped through them, reading fragments of the past. Names, stories, warnings. Every page told the same tale. Whitmore was built on a foundation of fear, secrecy, and rituals to contain something older than anyone could remember. The storm outside returned, not with rain, but with wind that rattled the shingles and whistled through cracks in the roof. Clara could hear it echoing through the hallways below. She knew she had to descend, to warn the others, but the knowledge she carried felt like a heavy weight. Descending the stairs, she noticed markings on the walls. Faint scratches, symbols carved long ago. They pulsed faintly in the moonlight, a reminder that someone or something had been here before. She recognized some symbols from Sister Agnes's journal. Protection, warnings, the tools of those who had tried to survive before her. Suddenly, a sound like a whisper brushed her ear. She spun around. No one. The candle trembled. The attic above seemed to hum. The shadows flickered. Clara realized that the darkness could not touch her directly while she carried the words of protection, but it could test her resolve. Every step, every creak of the old building was part of its challenge. In the hallway, she paused at the top of the main staircase. Downstairs, the seminary was dark and empty. The wind carried the faint smell of smoke and old wood. Her heart beat like a drum in her ears. She could see the main hall, the classroom doors, the chapel doors. Every doorway a potential hiding place. Clara whispered to herself, a vow and a warning. She would not fall. She would survive. The seminary had claimed too many already. She would not become another name in its ledger. The next sound she heard was different. Not dragging, not footsteps, but a soft tapping, like fingernails against wood. It came from the far end of the hallway, where the old chapel stood. Clara's instincts screamed at her to turn back, to flee, but she knew she had to confront it. She stepped forward, candle held high, every step measured, every breath controlled. The tapping grew louder, faster, more insistent. She entered the chapel. Moonlight spilled through the stained glass, casting colored patterns on the floor. In the center, a figure knelt, its back to her. The tapping stopped. The figure turned slowly. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but Clara could feel its gaze. Heavy, expectant. She raised her voice, chanting the final protection lines she had learned. The figure shivered, recoiling as if the words themselves burned. It let out a low moan and began to dissolve into shadow, retreating toward the corners of the room. Clara dropped to her knees again. Exhausted, trembling, but alive. She had faced the darkness of Whitmore Seminary and survived. But she knew the battle was far from over. The seminary held more secrets. More horrors. More of the darkness that fed on fear and silence. And she would face them all. Because she had no choice. Because she was still alive. Because she remembered her name. If you want, I can continue with part 10, the final part, bringing this horror and historic story to a chilling, unforgettable conclusion. Do you want me to create it next? Part 10 final. Engaging hook. Some doors close forever, and some shadows never leave. But even in the deepest darkness, courage can ignite the light. Part 10. The last night at Whitmore Seminary. Clara stood at the edge of the chapel, the echoes of the chanting still vibrating through the stone walls. The seminary was quiet, but not safe. Every corner, every hallway held memories of fear, whispers of the past, and shadows that had watched for centuries. She could feel them, just beyond the reach of her candlelight. The journal clutched in her hands was heavy, not with paper, but with the knowledge of generations. Sister Agnes, the other students, the nuns who had vanished without a trace. They had all left pieces of themselves behind, warnings written in faint ink and subtle symbols carved into the walls. Clara understood now that the seminary was alive. It breathed, it listened, and it fed on fear. A sudden creak startled her. Clara turned toward the attic staircase, her senses sharp. The shadows had not returned, not yet, but she knew they were waiting. The wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the scent of damp wood and smoke. The storm outside mirrored the storm in her heart. She remembered the lessons from the journal. The words of protection, the names of ancestors, the strength of belief. Every step she took, every whisper she spoke, was a shield. The darkness could test her, it could scare her, but it could not claim her as long as she remembered who she was. Clara moved through the seminary like a shadow herself, silent and alert. The classrooms were empty, the desks covered in dust. The library held only a few books, their pages brittle, their words faded. She paused at the doorway of the main hall, her candle illuminating symbols carved into the walls. Protection, warnings, secrets, they spoke to her in ways she had only begun to understand. Suddenly, the doors of the chapel slammed shut behind her. The candle flickered violently, almost extinguished. The air grew heavy, almost suffocating. Clara felt it. The darkness was here, not in the shadows, not in the corners, but all around her. It pressed against her mind, whispering fears, doubts, memories she had tried to forget. But she did not falter. Clara lifted her voice and recited the final words of the ritual. She called upon the courage of those who had faced this place before her. She named the students, the nuns, the teachers. She claimed her strength. She reminded the darkness that she was alive, and she would not be consumed. The air shifted. A low moan echoed through the hall, rising in pitch and intensity. The shadows swirled around her, thick and heavy, reaching with unseen hands. Clara's candle flared, bright and steady, as if answering her call. The darkness recoiled, hissing and twisting, unable to touch her. Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding, every nerve alive with fear and determination. She moved toward the altar, placing the journal down on the worn wood. She traced the carved symbols with her fingers, whispering the protection prayers over each one. The shadows writhed, but they could not pass her words. Then she heard it, a whisper, soft, almost human. "You cannot leave. This place belongs to us." Clara answered, her voice firm. "I belong to myself. I am alive. I am free." The shadows paused, hesitated, and then began to dissolve. The wind outside slowed, the storm fading into the night. The candlelight steadied, casting a warm glow across the chapel. Clara felt the weight of the seminary lift slightly, though she knew it was not gone forever. Whitmore had been contained, but not destroyed. Its secrets remained, waiting for the next to come unprepared. She picked up the journal and made her way down the hall. The staircases creaked under her careful steps, but nothing followed. The seminary seemed to respect her strength, at least for now. She passed the classrooms, the library, the hallways filled with centuries of whispered warnings. She could feel the presence of those who had come before, guiding her, watching over her. Outside, the moon had risen, casting pale light over the stone walls. Clara paused at the front doors. The night was quiet, almost peaceful. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. She had survived. She had faced the darkness of Whitmore Seminary and had not been claimed. She had learned its secrets, and she would carry them forward. As she stepped onto the path leading away from the building, Clara knew she was changed. She had been tested, haunted, and terrorized. She had seen the limits of human endurance and the depths of fear. But she had also discovered the strength of the human spirit, the power of memory, and the unbreakable bond between courage and survival. The seminary faded behind her, its windows dark and empty. But she could feel its presence, a reminder that some doors never truly close. Some shadows linger, and some secrets must be remembered, even when the world tries to forget. Clara walked into the night, the journal safe in her hands. She had faced Whitmore, and she had survived. She would tell her story, share the lessons, and warn those who might come after. For in surviving, she became the memory, the witness, the voice of those lost to fear. And she knew that as long as she remembered, the darkness could never truly win. The last echoes of the seminary faded, replaced by the wind and the stars. Clara had stepped out of terror and into her own strength. She had survived Whitmore Seminary. And she would never forget. If you found this story gripping, hit that like button to support our content. Share it with someone who loves chilling historical tales and leave a comment to tell us your thoughts. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and turn on notifications to never miss the next journey into history's darkest corners.